Do you love your creative push? Consider taking 2 minutes to leave a nice review on iTunes. By telling how the show has helped you, you'll help other people find it so they can help them too. If you need some simple instructions on how to do it, head to yourcreativepush.com/review. Thank you in advance for leaving a review, and thank you again to those who already have. Your Creative Push, episode 231.
It doesn't really matter what you think, and sometimes it doesn't matter what other people think either. If you want to do it, you just do it.
Welcome to Your Creative Push, the podcast that pushes you to pursue your creative passions. I'm your host, Youngmin Brown, and my guest today is Dani Ives. Dani is a self-taught fiber artist from Arkansas who has developed a beautiful and unique technique, which she calls painting with wool. She creates two-dimensional works of art directly on fabric. Her inspiration comes from a love of nature and science, which has an enormous influence on her work. Dani, welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Well, thank you for being here. I really appreciate it. I was wondering, could you start out by telling us kind of how you got to the point you are today in your artistic career?
Absolutely. So my artistic career kind of came about from like a hobby to a side hustle, and now I'm working full-time as a fiber artist. And I just actually had my kind of 2-year full-time anniversary just this last weekend. So,
congrats.
Thank you. Kind of an exciting milestone. So my background is in science and my background is in biology. I don't have formal training in art. So I kind of came about this in like a roundabout way. I went to school for biology. I have a degree in that. I got a further degree in conservation education because what I wanted to do as I was growing up was work with animals. So I love animals, I love nature and science and all of that, and I thought I wanted to be a veterinarian. So that's what I went to school for. And then at some point in college, I kind of decided that maybe I didn't want to go to school for that long. Mm-hmm. So just within my biology department, I was introduced to some volunteer programs around my town. I went up to school in Missouri and was introduced to the local zoo, and they had a volunteer program there. So I thought, okay, well, this is a great chance for me to get my foot in the door and actually work with animals. So after volunteering there for a couple of years, and then graduating, I started working there as an educator. So I spent 10 years at the zoo working as an educator, teaching kids, teaching adults, all about animals and their environment and all the cool sciencey things that I love to share about. That was an amazing job. I loved that job. And there was always a part of me, though, that kind of wanted to be, a maker, and I needed to fulfill that creative urge that I was having. So I would do things like take a local pottery class at the art museum and, just kind of teach myself things here and there. And then one day, I was chatting with a coworker, and I love her. She kind of knew everything there was to know about crafts, or at least, I felt that she did. Mm-hmm. And one day she mentioned needle felting to me, and I had no idea what she was talking about. But she explained that you could, create these little animal figurines, and that was right up my alley. So I looked it up and ordered some supplies, and for the most part, haven't looked back. I started creating things like cute little animal figurines and pincushions and jewelry, and it was more of like the crafty maker side of it. And then one year, I kind of challenged myself to do something new every week. And I started doing these wool paintings. And so it was more of like a flat image out of wool rather than a little sculpture. From that project, I was able to kind of experiment and dive into this one particular aspect of this fiber art and basically build a business out of it, which has been really great. I've been able to, kind of expand on that and create my own style, which is where I am today.
I love so many aspects of that story. Number one being like the fact that you were working in a completely unrelated field, like, and that's like, you were one of my favorite people. Like when I was a kid, like I was like, yes, like let's learn about animals. Like, I loved going to the zoo. Actually, my nephew just had a party recently, and I was just fascinated when they brought the animals in to show them. I think I was in the front row.
And that would have been me. That would have been me bringing the animals out.
I love it. So like my favorite part of that is like, that is like kind of creative in its own way, but like you said, like you wanted to fulfill that other urge of like making, and
right.
Even though you were going down a completely different path, you weren't afraid to pursue that, to scratch that itch and to kind of go with that. And it started as a hobby, and to allow it to be just a hobby, and then like you said, like a side hustle, and then a new career which you're able to kind of transition into. So what was that transition like?
Well, when I was doing it as a side hustle, I was doing my zoo job 40 hours a week, and then probably needle felting an additional 40 hours a week. I don't know. It was just, I would come home and then I would work.
Right.
But it was okay because it was fun and people were liking the things that I was making. And that was really cool. That's, that's a really fun high to be able to make money off of things that you make if other people like it. When I started being more comfortable with my technique, I started to offer commissions, and the biggest thing for me so far has been pet portraits. I love making pet portraits, and when I was comfortable enough to be able to offer that to people, that's when everything kind of took off, and that's when I realized that this was sustainable. I could do this full time and I would be okay. I'm married as well. And of course I have, my husband's income, it's kind of like a backup. So it wasn't like a make or break for me, but I didn't want to, I don't know, slack off.
Right. To use that as like too much of a crutch or whatever.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. I just wanted to do my part. So when I realized that this was sustainable and that I could basically fill all of my time with commissions, we realized that we could both step away from our current jobs, and then we moved. So
wow.
The funny thing is we both stepped away from our jobs. We moved back to Arkansas, and we lived on a little family farm for a year. We lived, I like to joke, we lived inside of a barn, which we did, but it was like, a little converted apartment. It was something like 500 square feet, and, across the hall were all the chickens, and across the field, the opposite way, were all the cows. So it was, a very kind of like romantic farm setting, and we were near family for a little while. And so that was a lot of fun. And it was great to be able to have that opportunity to step away from everything and just kind of slow down for a bit. That was an enjoyable time. And that was just a year ago. So being able to step away from that previous life and just kind of build up everything, it kind of felt like from the bottom. Even though I already had a clientele and I already had a business, I was still starting full time. And so it was almost like kind of a new life, stepping away from everything. But now it feels normal. We've moved to a different part of the state now, where there's a little bit more hustle and bustle, and a little more I hesitate to say culture, but I mean, we moved from small town to, probably one of the largest parts of the state. So, or at least the fastest growing. So there's a lot more to do, and there's definitely an arts community here where there wasn't before. So, at this point in my business and in my art career, I felt like that's what I needed. So, we moved here, and that's where we are.
Very cool. Up to date.
Yeah.
Well, that's cool, and I like that story, and I'm glad that you kind of have normalized now.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. That's kind of what it feels like.
Absolutely. So getting to your art itself, can you kind of explain what exactly makes your technique different than traditional needle felting?
Well, needle felting itself is a really cool process. The process involves taking wool fibers and you're felting them together with friction. And the friction is caused by a needle that has barbs on it. So what you do is you poke the fibers and the barbs catch the fibers and they tangle it together. And that's the actual process of felting. What I do is I felt the fibers into a base layer of fabric. And I like to use wool felt. I like to use linen. And I like to experiment on different things as well, burlap, just to see, what will take, what works. What I like to do is create the most realistic pieces I can with this medium. And I think that's what's, really surprising to most people is that it looks a lot like painting. And that's exactly what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to mimic painting and I'm trying to, use colors or light values and dark values and, trying to get the lighting and all of that perfect, especially for things like pet portraits. And that's one of my favorite things about it, though, is that it's a really cool mimicry of painting and of drawing.
And also the surprise, I'm sure, that people get when they realize what you can do.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite parts. I love I love when people see my pieces in person and I happen to be there, whether it's at a show or, I just had an exhibit opening a few weeks ago. And so it was really cool just to kind of be a little fly on the wall and watch people react to reading, what it's made out of. So that's always lots of fun.
And why is that important to you to, why not just paint?
That's a really great question. Sometimes I wish I did just paint.
Yeah, I'm sure it makes it more difficult, right?
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, just the other day I was working on a piece thinking this would be so much easier if I tried to do it in paint. But truthfully, it probably wouldn't because, just for me, because I don't have that painting. I've been doing this for years and I haven't painted for years. So I, romanticize that it would be easier if I painted, but for me, it probably wouldn't. I like the challenge and I like being able to surprise people about the medium. So that's the most fun part for me.
Very cool. And your subject matter is mostly animals as well as botanical pieces. So is that just because that still remains your interest, even though you've kind of changed careers?
Yeah, definitely. I will probably always focus on animals and I will probably always focus on natural subjects and botanicals. It's what I love to learn about. I still love teaching people about that kind of stuff. And it's also how I recharge. If I need a break, I'm going to go for a walk in the woods. And honestly, when I go hiking, that's where all my ideas come from, when I can just disconnect from everything. I've got kind of, 3 fun series in the back of my mind, and they all came to me fairly recently while I was in the woods and on separate occasions. So it's how I recharge and it's what I love to learn and share about. So I'm sure they will always be a main part of my art.
Very cool. And that's something that I try to advise people, and a lot of guests have suggested as well, as where they get all their ideas is out in nature. It's so funny how just disconnecting and taking yourself away from the work is the thing that kind of brings you back to the work and brings you those ideas.
It's true. The most the most recent one that I that I came up with, I was literally hiking and shouted out the name of a series. I wasn't alone in the woods just shouting things. My husband was with me too, but I'm sure it was very confusing to him until I explained it. So.
Hopefully it wasn't something like murder or something that you shouldn't be shouting in the woods. Help. No, that's good.
Although that could be something about crows. Because, a group of crows is called a murder.
Look at that. Well, I think we just came up with your next series.
Hey, I'm going to write that down.
Well, kind of speaking of that, you said you came up with like 3 series in your mind. And I know that for a lot of creative people, myself included, and I always suggest writing down all of your ideas no matter what. But what happens when you come up with like 3 really good ideas and you just don't know which one to pick? Like, how do you kind of divvy through them and decide which one's next? Is it just by feeling, or just like which one excites you the most, or which one seems most practical? Like, how do you pick?
Yes, yes, and yes. So, so yeah, it's for me, it's the one that I'm thinking about the most, and it's definitely the one that's most exciting. And it also helps if I can realize it a little bit better too. I've got one series of birds that I'm going to start soon that I have been thinking about for a while, and I am really excited to make it. And I also know that, a lot of my collectors would be really excited about this series too. So, it's kind of like, which one am I excited to make, and which one are other people also going to be excited to see? And maybe that one gets priority. I've got a few weird ones on the back burner that's just like, I don't know exactly how I'm going to realize this and how I'm going to make it work in my style. So we're just going to, maybe I'll just put that in the sketchbook for a little while and come back to it later. So it's definitely the one that has been on my mind and kind of been nagging at me for a while. That's the one that's going to get priority.
And sometimes the ones that are on the back burner, you realize later, weren't quite ready to be birthed anyway, until you kind of get like new ideas or new inspiration to kind of add to it.
Yeah, good point.
Well, and you just mentioned sketching things down, and I know that you recently challenged yourself to like fill a sketchbook, and yes. You also mentioned before, and when we were talking today, about like early on, doing something new every week to kind of challenge yourself. So I was wondering, could you talk a little bit about challenging yourself like this and like making these self-imposed kind of deadlines or challenges to kind of, like fill a sketchbook or do something new every week, and kind of what that does for you?
Yeah. So last year, every day, my goal was to add a page to a sketchbook until I filled one, because like I'm sure a lot of people, I get these sketchbooks, I add a page or two, and then I put it on a shelf. Mm-hmm. And nothing ever happens to it, and then maybe, I see another cool book and I'm going to get that and add a page to it. And then that one goes on the shelf too. So I had never filled a sketchbook before. Gosh, I think I actually did start on January 1st. And it was something that was kind of on my mind for a while, but I thought, okay, whatever, we'll just do the generic January 1st. And I did it, and I was just going to do it for myself. But then I posted about it on Instagram and everybody got excited. So then I was like, well, now I'm accountable for this. So here's my goal. I'm going to add a page or two a day and see what happens. And initially I didn't really have any rules other than just put something in the book. And it could have been just a tiny little doodle. It didn't have to be anything, extraordinary. And by all means, there definitely were not extraordinary pages in these books, but it was one of the coolest projects and most beneficial projects for me, because I got to discover so many things. I had never, tried painting with acrylics before that project. And it turns out I really love to paint with acrylics. It also kind of reinforced my love of trying to get uber realistic paintings and drawings. And I challenged myself and stepped out of my comfort zone and did kind of like a half self-portrait one day. But what was really fun was sharing all of these via an Instagram video every week. So every Monday, I would share the past week's sketchbook flip through. And it was really cool to see people's reactions. And it was also really cool to see how people were being inspired by that. And they started to pick up their own sketchbooks and fill their pages. So that project, and even though it was time consuming, there were some days where, I just didn't want to, but I did it anyway. And I'm really grateful that I stuck through the whole thing. And then I did every day last year, and I ended up filling 7 sketchbooks, which was really rewarding. I mean, they're small, but it's 7 sketchbooks, and I can go back through and, look at 365. Wait, was last year a leap year? 366.
We'll give you 366.
Yeah, okay. Different ideas. And from those ideas came other ideas for my fiber art. So it was a really cool project. And, if anybody's thinking about committing to anything like that, 30 days, 100 days, I know right now there's kind of a 100-day project going on around Instagram. Do it, because some really, really cool things can come out of it for you.
Yeah, that was my New Year's resolution episode, was to jam all of everything that you wanted to accomplish in a year, jam it all in January.
Oh,
and
wow.
just condense it down. Yeah. Do you think that the reason that, like you said, some days you didn't want to do it, but you did it anyway, do you think some of that has to do with the fact that you were kind of every week posting on Instagram? There were people that were kind of following it. Did you do it almost more for them? Yeah.
I wouldn't say I almost did it more for them, but it was just one of those things where it's if I don't do it, I'm going to be disappointed too. Mm-hmm. So, but definitely, that external accountability was very helpful for me.
Definitely. Yeah. And I love that idea of, filling a sketchbook, or, if you're a writer, just, writing X number of words per day, and without any kind of expectations. I think that's a really important thing that you said. Nothing extraordinary. You know what I mean? You don't have to really impress yourself or anybody else. It's kind of just getting stuff down and forcing yourself to do work. And also I love that the fact that you challenged yourself too to try new stuff, because then it's you can get things behind you and turn the to use a corny metaphor, to turn the page on some of the things that you have in your mind, to challenge yourself and to be all right, I've tried this thing now, or I've tried to draw this particular thing now, and either I liked it, I didn't like it, or I want to try it again. But either way, I've done it. I've put it on a page, and I can move on.
Yeah, it was a really important process too for me to kind of figure out what I didn't like, because you kind of assume that maybe you can do a lot of different things, but then you try it and maybe you can't. Mm-hmm. And that's okay.
Absolutely. I wanted to talk a little bit about teaching too, because you mentioned that. I know that you have some e-courses, and you also do some courses as well in real life. Is that right?
Yes, that is right.
So why is teaching kind of important to you? And is there any kind of surprises that you get from your students, or something that they do that surprises you?
I think teaching is just kind of ingrained in me at this point, because that's what my past career was. Mm-hmm. As an educator. That is not what I intended to be either. Coming out of college, it was a learned skill. And it's still a learned skill. I learn different things all the time when I teach. But I like it, and it's really important to me to introduce other creative outlets to people, because you never know what will help somebody flourish, or what will help, somebody build up their creativity, in whatever way. My students are always really surprised at how easy the actual needle felting process is. You make it as hard as you want it to be, basically, because the process is simple. You're just laying the wool down, you're just poking it in, and you can be, as realistic, or you can make some really cool abstract things with it. So it's always really fun to watch them kind of light up, this is what you do, and this is all you have to do. So many different things can come out of it. It's always, every class, I always get the comment too about, how you're constantly stabbing something.
It can be therapeutic.
Exactly. I love to talk about that, because it's, you are constantly stabbing something. It's stress relieving, but it's also really kind of addicting. I like it when people talk about, kind of how addictive it is, because it really is, because you can just constantly kind of work on a piece, and it's not really like painting and all of that. You can just kind of layer and remove things and just keep working as much as you want.
Yeah, and you stab enough there, you can save yourself from murdering.
Exactly.
So your e-course, is that something that people could like kind of log into now and just like you said, kind of see how easy it is and really experiment for themselves?
Yeah, I've got a couple e-courses. One teaches my painting with wool techniques, all the different tips and tricks that I use just to create an image on that base fabric. And then another one is a sculptural one with the things that I started needle felting with. So I teach a course about how to create different three-dimensional felted cacti, which is really fun. And then there's a bonus toadstool course in there because I love toadstools and I'm kind of obsessed with them. Yeah, those are both on my website under the e-course tab. It's daniives.com. And yeah, those are available all the time.
Very cool. And yeah, I think for people that want to try something new, that's like a really cool, I might do it.
Hey, yeah.
And like you said, like when your friend kind of introduced you to needle felting, you went down a different path. You know what I mean? You kind of developed this unique style. And so you don't really never know where you're going to go with a particular art, or even what you can bring back to what you do right now as your creative passion from trying something new. So it's definitely worth a try.
I completely agree.
So we've talked a little bit about some of the resistances that you've had before, but would you say that you experience any resistances today on a daily basis with your art?
Definitely. Not having had any formal art training, barely any classes. I took a figure drawing class when I moved to this town last summer, and that was really kind of enlightening and really fun. But it also taught me how much I didn't know about art. So just kind of that, I mean, everybody talks about imposter syndrome, and that's totally real. I experience that all the time. Who am I to be talking about art and teaching and all of that? It's just something to get over, and it becomes easier, of course. But I think feeling kind of that resistance, if not daily, definitely, weekly at some point, there's always that kind of weird, like, well, I don't know if I'm qualified to be doing this. But the fact is it doesn't really matter what you think. And sometimes it doesn't matter what other people think either. If you want to do it, you just do it. That's just kind of where I'm at right now with all of that.
Right. It's not like you're tricking people. I think that's something that with the imposter syndrome, I think a lot of people deal with it. I deal with it. It's just like, well, the opposite end, if you let imposter syndrome take over, is it's just going to stop you from doing anything, and you're not going to be able to help anybody or share anything with anybody, which is what art is all about. Yeah, like you said, you kind of have to get over it, and the way to get over it is by just kind of keep plugging away and keep trying.
Right. It's like you kind of build up your own tolerance to that feeling, and you just got to go.
And realize that it's always going to be there no matter where you get in your career. Like once if you have the imposter syndrome and says that, oh, I have to be this, I have to reach this level in order to not be an imposter anymore, to be like an authoritative figure. But then you reach that point and you still feel like an imposter. So it's like, it never goes away.
Yeah, that's a good point. And that's also kind of a scary thought to think about, like how it might not ever go away. But like I said, if you just kind of learn how to move past it, kind of build up that tolerance, then we're good.
We're all good. Do you have a formula for balancing your time with all the things you've got going on with creating, and then all these different projects that you have in your mind ready to go, and then teaching as well?
No, not really. My best way to combat all the ideas and all the projects is just to kind of sit down and get it all on paper. For me, that's really helpful. I'm a list maker through and through. So I love my planner and I love my lists. And for the most part, I'm trying really hard to spend a little less time on social media. But I mean, honestly, and I know like some people would view this as an excuse, but Instagram for me has been really, really huge for sharing my art and growing my business. So, I don't mind nurturing that, but it's also hard to kind of step away. So For me, it's more of a time management of, where do I need to be focusing my energies? I also try to give myself deadlines for things like commissions. If I'm opening up commissions, I usually sell them for shipment within a certain month. So at least that gives me kind of like a little bit of a deadline there. And then I can plan the rest of my days accordingly. So for me, being 2 years into this, it's still very much a learning process, the whole time management thing and balancing everything. And I feel like, as new projects come on and old ones go, it's just always going to be just a little bit of a juggle. And I think I'm okay with that for now, until somebody comes up with something better.
And you mentioned spending less time on social media. Is that just in general, you're like, I can't spend as much time on social media? Or do you kind of plan it out and be like, all right, in the mornings, I'm going to spend 30 minutes or something like that. Or at night, I'm going to spend 30 minutes or both. Or is it just kind of just trying to taper off?
It's more for me, like I'm going to spend this chunk of time working. And then maybe, while I'm eating my lunch, I'll check my email and I'll check everything else. And then, so I need to find some good chunks of uninterrupted time during my day to be able to create. Because what happens is I tend to kind of piece things out, and I'm a lot less efficient with my needle felting that way. I need to kind of sit down with a big chunk of time to be able to make some pretty good progress. But it's also good for me to take breaks because the repetitive motion of needle felting can kind of wear out my hand muscles and also my eyes too, because I'm focusing on some really tiny details sometimes. So, just kind of chunking out my time in, work hours and then maybe just a few, little breaks here and there throughout the day is I'm finding to be the most helpful and efficient so far.
For sure. It's like anything else. It's just like getting used to it and trying to figure out what works for you.
Yeah.
Before we get to the final push, I was wondering, do you have any resources or like a favorite book, person, movie, YouTube clip, or anything else that you kind of draw inspiration from, and maybe we could as well?
Yeah, I love to listen to podcasts. It's hard for me to watch anything while I'm working because I have to pay attention to my fingers so I don't poke myself.
Right.
But so I love to consume podcasts, and I consume so many different kinds, but I love hearing about artists and their backgrounds and, how their lives and their upbringings have affected their art. So it was really fun to discover your podcast for that. So I'm binging on those.
Yay!
But I also love to listen to The Jealous Curator. She has some really fun interviews of artists that she does. And I also really like podcasts that are geared towards entrepreneurs because, I like to make art, but I also have a business. So it's always fun to glean inspiration from those. I love it's newish, How I Built This from NPR.
Oh, cool. Yeah.
I really like that one. And I also listen to a podcast by Jason Zook. It's called the Action Army Podcast. And it's geared toward, creatives and entrepreneurs and covers things like life topics like living intentionally and, money, how to nurture your weird ideas. And, like I said, all of that kind of goes hand in hand for me because I'm creating art, but I also have to make a living at it. So it's important for me just to kind of see all of those different aspects of kind of growing and building a business and how people are making theirs work.
Very cool. Yeah, and if you're listening to this podcast, I mean, all it takes is a couple more clicks and you can get to find any other kind of podcast you're interested in to further niche down. I think that the cool thing about podcasts is that anything that you're interested in, probably somebody's creating a podcast about it. And if not, then you can create it. That's what I did.
Exactly, yeah.
And if literally, if anybody listening, that's you, just reach out to me and I'll help you start it. Because I've actually some listeners that have already started their own podcast and I've helped them out. So I'm very excited about podcasting. So
that's amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. So Dani, it is time for the final push. And that's where I ask you to reach through the microphone and grab the shoulder of one of the listeners that you've already really inspired today and just give them your best words of advice and really push them to pursue their own creative passions.
Yeah. So my advice, first and foremost, is you have to put yourself out there and you have to share your work. And it might be scary, but you should be proud of your creativity. You know, you don't even have to wait until you have something finished, because what's really cool is that people like to see your process. It's kind of a really cool way to have people feel more invested in you and in your work, and they've kind of come along this journey with you. So definitely share your work and your art, you know, whatever it is. And I also like to tell people that it's okay to reach out, just like you suggested with creating a podcast. It's important to learn what you need help with and how to ask for help. Most people are going to be kind and they're going to help you, because I think anymore, everybody realizes that there's room for success for everyone. And success for one person means success for other people. So reach out if you need it, and ask for help. And then one last thing I want to say is that it's okay to break the rules, whether it's with your medium or your subjects. I mean, this is kind of what artists do, right? They do the unexpected. They break rules because really cool things can happen when you step out of your comfort zone and when you push boundaries.
I couldn't agree more with everything you said. Yeah, be proud of your work, put yourself out there, and I'd take it a step further. And it's not only okay to break the rules, but it's encouraged. Like,
yeah,
do
definitely.
do something new. Like, really push it as far as you can. Like, it can't hurt. And it won't be as like, it's not like people are going to be like, no, like that totally breaks all of our expectations. Like, you cannot go that far. Like, go further.
Exactly. I agree.
Dani, thank you so much for coming on the show today and for giving us that push. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. This has been such a pleasure.
Oh, for us too. And you can find Dani on her website, which is DaniIves.com. That's DaniIves.com. On Instagram, she is Be Good Natured. You can find links to all the other places that she's at, as well as the podcast we talked about and all the other resources at yourcreativepush.com/Dani Ives. Dani, thanks again.
Thank you.
Oh, big thanks to Dani again for coming on the show. I just love her story about doing something that she loves, you know, working with animals, being able to teach children about animals, but having that need to be a maker, and how it just kept creeping in. And I think that's the story for a lot of us. Even if we might happen to love our job that we're currently being fulfilled by, there's something else that just keeps itching at us, even if it is just a glimpse of an idea. And then how she was able to do that thing, to find that thing, and then able to transition into it as a job once she kind of found her footing and realized that she could make a living at it with those pet portraitures. So making that smart transition then from a hobby to a career. And such solid advice from her as well, to just try something new, even if it is way out of your comfort zone, even if it is something that you thought you'd never do before, like wool felting, to just try it out, and you'll never know the ways that it can open you up. Like she said, you don't have to do anything extraordinary. You can just mess around, fill up a sketchbook, start playing some chords, start writing some words down, whatever it is. Just do it. It doesn't have to be extraordinary. Just try it out and see where it takes you. And then, wherever it takes you, to be proud of it. It doesn't matter what you think, what other people think. Just do it and be proud of your own creativity. On Monday's show, we have something a little different. Alatar is coming on the show, a digital artist who creates character-driven adult illustration, so something sexy for you. but Alatar shares their very personal and touching story about how you sometimes have to hit your lowest point to realize the thing that inspires you the most. So a super fun conversation and one that you can't miss on Monday. If you want to find more about Alatar, you can find them on Tumblr, Twitter, and Instagram as Blue Wizard Art. And you can also find them in their new podcast, Blue Magic, at bluemagic.libsyn.com. I actually gave some advice on how to start that podcast. They are a part of the Facebook group, so I was serious when I mentioned that in this episode, which is actually kind of funny and a synchronicity. Yay. But for real, it is easy to start a podcast. It's a little bit scary, but we talk a little bit about that with Alatar on Monday as well. And you can find all of those links, of course, at today's show notes page at yourcreativepush.com/231. But that is all I've got for you today. Hopefully you were inspired to go and get your work done. So go and get it done, and we will be here for you on Monday if you need that push again. Have a wonderful, productive weekend. I love you all, and we will see you then. Bye. Never miss a push. Head to yourcreativepush.com/subscribe to find the easiest way for you to subscribe to the podcast.